What would you do if you discovered that behind the sacred walls of a convent in the heart of rural Pennsylvania, there was a secret so dark that the Vatican itself had to intervene to stop it? 2 pregnant nuns, a completely isolated convent, no man authorized to enter for over 30 years, and a truth so chilling that when it was revealed, it shook the very foundations of the church itself. I was there. I saw everything. And what I'm about to tell you will forever change the way you look at sacred places. It was March 15th, 1994, when Sister Agnes, with trembling hands and a face pale as wax, knocked on the Mother Superior's door at 3 in the morning. Her words were barely a whisper, but they were enough to bring down a castle of lies built over years. "Mother," she said with a broken voice, "I can't hide it anymore. I'm pregnant." But what no one knew yet was that she wasn't the only one. Just 2 days later, Sister Bernadette would confess the same thing. 2 pregnancies, 0 explanations, and a mystery that would lead Vatican investigators to discover something unimaginable. But before I reveal what they really found behind those walls, I need to ask you a question. Have you ever thought about how easy it can be to hide the truth when everyone around you blindly believes in your sanctity? Stay with me, because this story has so many twists that by the time you reach the end, you'll wonder how it's possible that no one noticed sooner. If this story is already giving you chills, leave a like now and subscribe to the channel, because what I'm about to tell you is just the beginning. Share this video with someone who absolutely needs to hear this story. And now get ready, because what happened at St. Clare's Convent you'll never forget. Let's go back 3 years. It was the summer of 1991 when I first arrived at St. Clare's Convent, perched on the hills of rural Pennsylvania, surrounded by century-old oak trees and stone walls so high they seemed to touch the sky. My name was Lucy Morrison, and I was 23 years old. I had been sent there as a lay assistant to help in the kitchens and with domestic work. I hadn't taken vows, but I wanted to live in that sacred place, away from the chaos of the world. The convent housed 32 cloistered nuns, 32 women who had chosen to dedicate their lives to God, giving up everything. No contact with the outside world except through censored letters, no television, no telephone, and above all, no men. The only male authorized to enter was Father Frank, the priest who celebrated Sunday Mass, but even he only entered the chapel and never the private areas of the convent. He was 68 years old, walked with a noticeable limp, and was always accompanied by 2 elderly nuns who watched his every move. The Mother Superior was Sister Margaret, a 65-year-old woman with ice-cold eyes and iron discipline. She commanded that place with an iron fist. Every hour of the day was marked by prayer, work, silence. There was no room for deviations, for doubts, for questions. "Here we obey God and the rule," she always said. "The rest is vanity." But beneath that surface of monastic perfection, something was rotting. Sister Agnes was 29 years old when I arrived. She was a petite girl, with brown hair I could barely glimpse under her veil, and hazel eyes that always seemed sad. She was responsible for the garden, and spent hours among the roses and vegetables, speaking little, praying much. The other nuns respected her, but there was something about her that disturbed me, a hidden fragility, as if she carried an invisible weight on her shoulders. Sister Bernadette, on the other hand, was 32 years old and the exact opposite. Tall, robust, with a deep voice and penetrating gaze. She was the convent's nurse, the one who took care of the elderly and sick nuns. She had studied medicine before taking vows, and everyone knew she was brilliant. But there was also something strange about her, a constant nervousness, a way of looking toward the shadows, as if she feared someone was watching her. I never would have imagined that these 2 women, so different from each other, shared the same terrible secret. The first months at the convent were peaceful. I woke up at 5 in the morning, participated in prayers, worked in the kitchen, helped with laundry. Life was repetitive but serene, or at least it seemed that way. But I began to notice strange things, small things. Sister Agnes vomiting every morning and saying it was just a flu that never passed. Sister Bernadette, who had stopped participating in heavier work, saying she had back pain. The way both avoided the Mother Superior's gaze during meals. And then there were the nights I heard them crying. First one, then the other. Muffled sobs that echoed in the stone corridors. One evening in February 1994, I was returning from the kitchen to my cell when I saw Sister Agnes kneeling in the chapel, completely alone. The moon filtered through the stained glass windows and illuminated her like in a painting. She was touching her belly, and in that moment even I in my innocence understood. She was pregnant. My heart beat so hard I thought I would faint. How was it possible? In a cloistered convent, without men? My mind raced to 1,000 explanations, each more absurd than the last, but the truth was before my eyes. That woman was carrying life in her womb. Should I tell someone? Stay silent? I didn't know what to do, but the decision was taken out of my hands a few weeks later, that terrible March night when Sister Agnes knocked on the Mother Superior's door. I was awake. I heard everything. The screams, the accusations, Sister Agnes's desperate crying, and then the Mother Superior's icy voice. This is impossible. Impossible. Who was it? Who touched you? But Sister Agnes didn't answer, or rather she said something I couldn't hear. And then there was only silence. The next day the convent was in silent turmoil. Everyone knew something had happened, but no one dared to speak. Sister Agnes was confined to her cell. We didn't see her for days, and then, like a second earthquake, came Sister Bernadette's confession. The Mother Superior had no choice. She had to inform the diocese, and the diocese informed the Vatican. Think for a moment about what this meant for the Church. A cloistered convent, completely isolated with 2 pregnant nuns. It was a scandal of unimaginable proportions. If the news leaked, it would be a media catastrophe. But more than that, it was a mystery that defied all logic. Who was the father? How could it have happened? And above all, had anything else happened that we didn't know about? The Vatican investigation began quietly. 3 investigators arrived, all men in civilian clothes. They introduced themselves as diocesan inspectors, but we all understood they were something more. They had the authority to interrogate anyone, to examine every record, to enter every room. The convent was put in total lockdown. No one could enter or leave. Letters were blocked. The Mother Superior's phone calls were recorded. They interrogated me for 3 hours. They wanted to know everything. What I had seen, what I had heard, if I had noticed suspicious behavior. I answered honestly. I talked about the nighttime crying, Sister Agnes's vomiting, Sister Bernadette's nervousness, but I had no answers to their most important questions. They interrogated all the nuns, one by one. Some came out of the rooms crying, others in silence, with empty gazes. And then they interrogated the 2 pregnant nuns separately again and again, but both remained silent on one crucial point. They never revealed who the father was. Or rather, they said something, but what they said seemed impossible to believe. Do you want to know what they confessed? Wait just a moment longer, because what I'm about to tell you is only part of the puzzle. And I assure you that when all the pieces are in their place, you'll be speechless. The investigators began examining the convent's records. Who had access? When? Under what circumstances? Father Frank, the elderly priest, was interrogated first. He was visibly shocked. He swore he had never set foot beyond the chapel, and 2 nuns testified that he was always under supervision. Moreover, he was 70 years old and had health problems. The investigators didn't consider him a credible suspect. But then who? They examined the suppliers. Once a month, a van arrived with provisions. But the driver, a 55-year-old man named Joseph, unloaded everything at the outside entrance, never entered. The nuns retrieved the crates and brought them inside. Joseph was interrogated anyway and quickly cleared. There was a gardener who came twice a year to prune the tallest trees. His name was Mark. He was 42 years old. The investigators tracked him down. His last visit was 8 months before Sister Agnes's pregnancy. Too far apart chronologically. He was also ruled out. External medical checks. No, Sister Bernadette handled everything internally. Maintenance workers, electricians, plumbers. No one had entered in the last 2 years. The investigators were beginning to get frustrated. All leads led to dead ends. How was it possible for 2 women to become pregnant in such a controlled environment? And then they asked the question no one dared to ask aloud. Was it possible that the person responsible was inside the convent itself? Sister Bernadette had studied medicine. She had access to tools, knowledge. But how could she have obtained what was needed? And why? What would have been the motive, The Mother Superior was interrogated harshly. Her initial reaction of shock seemed genuine, but the investigators left nothing to chance. They examined her correspondence, her movements, her personal finances before entering the convent. Everything came up clean. She was a rigid, severe woman, but apparently irreproachable. Weeks passed and the investigation seemed stuck. The two pregnant nuns were now in their 4th month. Their bellies were beginning to show under their habits. The Vatican was increasingly nervous. They had to find the truth before the situation became unmanageable. And then, one night, something happened that changed everything. It was April 26th. I remember the date because it was my mother's birthday, and I hadn't been able to call her. I was in my cell, unable to sleep, when I heard hurried footsteps in the corridor, then agitated voices. I looked out just barely and saw 2 investigators running toward the east wing of the convent, where the cells of the oldest nuns were located. The next morning we discovered what had happened. Sister Francine, 82 years old, one of the oldest nuns in the convent, had asked to speak with the investigators. She had something to say, something she had kept hidden for 40 years. Her testimony would bring everything crashing down. Sister Francine had entered that convent in 1954. She had been there for 40 years. She had seen generations of nuns come and go. She knew every secret of those walls. And that night, perhaps because of her advanced age, perhaps because of the weight of conscience, perhaps because she understood that time was running out, she decided to speak. What she said left the investigators ice cold. In the 1960s, when Sister Francine was still young, there had been another case. A nun had become pregnant. At the time, the Mother Superior was another woman, Sister Teresa. And even then, they had tried to understand how it was possible, but they never found the person responsible. The nun was sent away in secret, the baby given up for adoption, and the entire affair covered up. But Sister Francine knew the truth. That nun had confessed everything to her shortly before leaving. And what she had told her was chilling. There was a secret passage, an underground tunnel that connected the convent to an old abandoned farmhouse about 200 yards away. It had been built centuries before, probably during wars, as an escape route in case of siege. Over the years, it had been forgotten, walled up, erased from official records, but someone knew of its existence and had used it. The investigators were incredulous. A secret passage, like in a movie. But Sister Francine was unmoved. She told them where to look. In the basement, behind an old wooden shelf in the cellar, where jams and preserves were stored. That same night, with the help of workers called in great secrecy, they moved the shelf. And behind it, hidden by decades of dust and cobwebs, there was an opening. A door of rotten wood, barred with rusty bolts. They opened it. On the other side, there was darkness. A deep darkness that seemed to swallow the light from the flashlights. But there was also something else. A smell. Not of mold and abandonment as one would have expected. No. It was a recent smell. Of life. Of human presence. Someone had used that tunnel, and recently, the investigators descended into the passage with extreme caution. It was narrow, damp, the stone walls covered with moss. They walked hunched over because the ceiling was low. Their voices echoed in a sinister way. After about 50 yards, the tunnel turned, and then it climbed. A steep staircase carved into the rock. At the top, there was another door. This one wasn't barred. It opened easily. And on the other side, in the old farmhouse, they found something no one would have ever expected. There were signs of recent life. A cot, blankets, used candles, food remains. And above all, they found clothes. Men's clothes. Not just any clothes. Priestly vestments. But they weren't Father Frank's vestments. They belonged to someone else. The investigators photographed everything, collected evidence, and then quickly returned to the convent. They had to talk to the two pregnant nuns again. Because it was clear they had lied, or at least they had omitted the most important part of the truth. Sister Agnes was interrogated first. This time there was no gentleness in the questions. The investigators showed her photos of the tunnel, the house, the clothes, and they asked her directly who the man was who used that passage. And finally, after weeks of silence, Sister Agnes broke down. She cried so hard that her tears seemed like they would never end. And then, with a voice broken by pain and shame, she told everything. The man's name was Father Dominic, but he wasn't a simple priest. He was a bishop, a high prelate from the nearby diocese. He was 52 years old, had an impeccable reputation, was considered a man of great holiness and devotion. No one would have ever suspected him. But behind that facade of perfection hid a monster. Father Dominic had discovered the tunnel years before, probably through old diocesan documents, and he had begun to use it. At first he came only to pray in solitude, he said. He entered at night when everyone was sleeping and retreated to the old farmhouse for hours of meditation. The nuns didn't know of his presence, but then he had begun to explore the convent itself. He entered the cells. He watched the nuns while they slept, and he had identified his victims. Sister Agnes was the first. One night, he woke her by putting a hand over her mouth. He told her he was there by God's will, that it was a test of her faith that she had to obey. And she, terrified, confused, raised in an environment where obedience to the clergy was absolute, didn't dare rebel. It happened multiple times. He returned, always at night, always in silence. And she said nothing to anyone because he had made her believe it was her fault, that she had sinned, that if she spoke, she would be the one punished. The same had happened to Sister Bernadette. Same dynamic, same threats, same silence. When they discovered they were pregnant, they didn't know what to do. They were afraid to speak because Father Dominic had warned them. If you say anything, I'll destroy you. I'll say you seduced me, that you're the sinners, and everyone will believe me. And he was right. Who would have believed two nuns against a bishop? But now the truth was out. The investigators acted quickly. Father Dominic was tracked down and arrested that same night. He denied everything, naturally, but the evidence was overwhelming. DNA would confirm his paternity. The clothes in the farmhouse were his, and when they searched his residence, they found a diary where he had documented everything, the dates, the names, his visits to the convent. It was all there, written in neat, almost meticulous handwriting, as if he were proud of what he had done. But the most chilling thing was something else. Sister Agnes and Sister Bernadette weren't the only ones. In the diary there were other names, other nuns, other victims over the years. Some were still in the convent, others had left without ever saying anything. And some were dead, taking the secret to their graves. St. Clare's convent had not been a place of peace and prayer. It had been a prison, a place where a predator had hunted undisturbed for years, protected by his position, by the blind trust that nuns placed in the clergy, and by the silence imposed by fear. When the truth came out, there was collective shock inside the convent. Nuns who had lived there for decades began to remember strange things. Nighttime noises they had ignored, strange behavior from some sisters they had never understood, and guilt began to spread. How could they not have noticed? How was it possible that no one had seen anything? But the truth is that Father Dominic had been extremely skilled. He moved like a shadow. He chose the most vulnerable victims, those he knew wouldn't speak, and he had used faith itself as a weapon against them. The Mother Superior was devastated. She felt responsible. All those women were under her protection, and she had failed. She locked herself in her cell for days, refusing to eat. Some nuns feared she might harm herself, but in the end she emerged different, smaller, more fragile, as if the weight of that revelation had taken something vital from her. Sister Agnes and Sister Bernadette were transferred to a protected facility where they could receive medical and psychological assistance. They would give birth to their babies in safety, away from the eyes of the world, and they would have the freedom to choose what to do. Keep them, give them up for adoption, no pressure, no judgment. Father Dominic was tried in an ecclesiastical tribunal. Naturally, the church tried to keep everything confidential, but some journalists smelled the story. They began asking questions, and eventually pieces of the truth began emerging in local newspapers. Bishop arrested for crimes in convent. Church scandal, prelate accused by nuns. The headlines were cautious, the information vague, but they were enough to create an earthquake. Father Dominic was defrocked. This means he was removed from all his positions, stripped of his ecclesiastical authority, and then he was handed over to civil authorities. He was tried for what he had done. The testimonies of Sister Agnes and Sister Bernadette were crucial, but other victims, encouraged by their strength, also began to speak. In total, 7 women filed formal charges against him. 7 women who for years had lived with that secret, thinking they were alone, thinking they were at fault. And instead they discovered they were sisters in pain, united by a shared tragedy. The trial lasted months. It was painful, humiliating for the victims who had to publicly recount what they had suffered. But in the end, justice was done. Father Dominic was sentenced to 30 years in prison. He would die there, far from the sacred walls he had profaned. But the question everyone was asking was, how had it been possible? How could a man in such a high position, so respected, do such things for years without being discovered? The answer is uncomfortable. It's an answer many don't want to hear, but it's the truth. It had been possible because there existed a culture of silence, a culture where victims were more afraid to speak than to suffer in silence, where ecclesiastical authority was so absolute that questioning a priest, let alone a bishop, was unthinkable. And Father Dominic knew it. He had exploited that system. He had used it as a shield, and for years it had worked. But thanks to the courage of Sister Agnes and Sister Bernadette, that silence had finally been broken. In the following months, St. Clare's convent underwent radical changes. The secret tunnel was permanently sealed. Security systems were installed. The rules on supervision of outside visits were completely revised. And above all, a clear protocol was established. If any nun had anything to report, she could do so anonymously directly to the diocese, bypassing the Mother Superior if necessary. But the damage had been done. Many nuns left the convent. They could no longer feel safe in that place. The idea that for years a predator had freely entered their cells, had observed, chosen, acted, was too much for them. They preferred to start over elsewhere. The convent, which had housed 32 nuns, was reduced to 12, a shadow of what it had been. I stayed for a few more months. I wanted to support those women who had decided to remain, but it was difficult for me too. Every night when I went to bed, I thought about how easy it had been for him to enter, and I wondered how many other victims there had been over the centuries in places like that. How many women had suffered in silence, protected by the very walls that should have kept them safe. Sister Agnes gave birth to a baby boy, a healthy little boy with big, curious eyes. She decided to keep him. She left the convent, obviously, and moved to a small town in upstate New York where no one knew her story. She started over from scratch. She worked as a gardener just like she did at the convent, and she raised her son with all the love she had. A love that wasn't tainted by the circumstances of his conception, because that child wasn't at fault. He was innocent, and he deserved a life full of joy. Sister Bernadette chose differently. She gave birth to a baby girl, beautiful with dark hair and a strong cry, but she knew she couldn't raise her, not for lack of love, but because every time she would look at her, she would see him. She would relive those nightmares. So with a broken heart, she gave her up for adoption to a couple who couldn't have children, a couple who would love her as she deserved. And Sister Bernadette returned to the world, no longer as a nun, but as a woman. She enrolled in university, completed her studies in psychology, and dedicated her life to helping other women who had suffered similar traumas. She became a powerful voice. She spoke publicly about what had happened to her. She wrote a book, not for revenge, but for healing, and above all, to prevent it from happening again. The Church reacted in a complex way. Some high prelates expressed shame and promised reforms. Others downplayed it, saying it was an isolated case, an aberration. But the truth was that it wasn't isolated. As Father Dominic's story became public, other victims in other places began to come forward. And a much broader and much more frightening picture emerged. The case of St. Clare's convent became symbolic, a turning point, no longer whispers and corridor gossip, but a clear and public denunciation, and slowly, very slowly, changes began. But for the victims, no reform would ever erase the pain experienced. No apology would ever give them back the stolen years, the betrayed trust, the lost innocence. Years later, I returned to visit St. Clare's convent. It was a sunny day. The oak trees swayed in the breeze and everything seemed so peaceful, but I knew what was hidden behind those walls. I knew what secrets had been buried there for decades. The new Mother Superior welcomed me with kindness. She was a young woman, just 50 years old, with a completely different approach. "Things have changed here now," she told me. "We will never again allow something like that to happen." I wanted to believe her. I really did. But a part of me remained skeptical. because I had seen with my own eyes how easy it was for evil to hide behind the sacred habit, how simple it was for a predator to exploit trust and faith. As I walked through the corridors, I passed by the chapel, and there, kneeling in prayer, was a young nun. I didn't know her. She had probably arrived after my departure. She prayed with fervor, with that pure devotion I had seen in so many women. And I thought, does she know? Does she know the history of this place? Or has she been kept in the dark, protected by innocence? I didn't have the courage to interrupt her to ask. Maybe it was better that way. But I know one thing. Every place has a memory. The stones remember. The corridors remember. And those memories don't disappear just because we want to forget. Let's recap for a moment what happened, because it's important not to lose the thread. 2 nuns became pregnant in a completely isolated convent. A Vatican investigation discovered a secret passage that a bishop used to enter at night. 7 women in total found the courage to report, and a predator who was hiding behind sacred vestments was finally unmasked. But the story doesn't end here, because what happened afterward changed many people's lives in ways no one could have predicted. 3 years passed since Father Dominic's conviction. I had definitively left the convent and was working as a teacher at an elementary school in Philadelphia. I was trying to rebuild a normal life away from those memories. But the past has a strange way of reaching you when you least expect it. One November afternoon, while I was correcting my students' homework, the phone rang. It was a number I didn't know. I almost didn't answer, but something pushed me to do so. On the other side was a voice I hadn't heard in years, fragile but determined. It was Sister Agnes, or rather Agnes. She hadn't been a nun for a long time. "Lucy," she said, "I need to see you. It's important. It's about him." My heart stopped. Him. Father Dominic. What could there still be to say about that man? He was in prison, convicted, finished. Or at least that's what I thought. We met at a small cafe near Independence Hall. Agnes had changed. No longer the fragile girl I had known at the convent. She had become a strong, confident woman. Next to her was a 3-year-old boy with brown curls and lively eyes, her son, little Matthew. After greetings and an ordered coffee, Agnes got straight to the point. "He's dead," she said. "Father Dominic, 2 weeks ago, heart attack in prison." For a moment, I didn't know what to say. I felt a sense of relief, but also something more complex. That news definitively closed a chapter. There would never be possible early release, no escape, no return. It was truly over. "But there's something else," Agnes continued, lowering her voice. "Before he died, he wrote a letter to his lawyer, and the lawyer delivered it to me, to Bernadette, and to the others. A letter for each of us." I looked at her incredulously. "He dared to write to you? After everything he did to you?" Agnes nodded slowly. "I haven't opened it yet. I don't know if I want to read it, but I think I should. I think we all should, because only then can we truly close this story." I asked if I could be with her when she opened it, and she agreed. That evening at her house, with Matthew sleeping in the next room, Agnes opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside were 3 pages written by hand with handwriting that trembled, perhaps a sign of the illness that had led to his death. I read along with her, and what was written left me speechless. Father Dominic didn't ask for forgiveness. Not in the way one would expect. There were no apologies, no pathetic justifications. Instead, with chilling lucidity, he explained why he had done it. He talked about his childhood, about a violent father and an absent mother, about how he had entered seminary not for vocation, but to escape that house, about how he had climbed the ecclesiastical ranks not for holiness, but for ambition and for the power that position guaranteed him. And then he talked about when he discovered the tunnel, about how that discovery had given him a sense of total control, about how the first time he had entered only out of curiosity, but then something had happened inside him. Something he described as a dark awakening. He wrote, "I understood I could do whatever I wanted, that I was untouchable, and that feeling of absolute power became a drug stronger than any faith." He showed no remorse for his actions. He only showed a cold understanding of himself. And this, in a perverse way, was even more disturbing. But at the end of the letter, there was something that changed everything. A revelation no one expected. "I wasn't alone," he wrote. "There was someone else who knew about the tunnel. Someone who had used it before me, and that person is still free. Agnes dropped the letter. Her eyes were wide with shock. What does this mean? She whispered. There was someone else. I took the letter and reread that passage. It was clear. Father Dominic claimed that someone else knew of the tunnel's existence, someone who had acted before him, and who perhaps had continued even after his capture. But who? And why hadn't he said anything during the trial? Why reveal this information only now, after death? Perhaps it was the last cruelty, a way to leave a shadow of doubt, to prevent the victims from truly finding peace, or perhaps he was telling the truth. I immediately called Bernadette. She too had received a similar letter. And in the other letters too, there was the same mysterious hint. I wasn't alone. The authorities were informed. The investigation, which everyone believed was closed, was reopened. Investigators returned to the convent. They interrogated all the nuns again, particularly the oldest ones. They examined old records, historical documents, anything that could reveal who else had known the tunnel's secret, and slowly, another truth emerged. An even darker truth. Sister Francine, the elderly nun who had revealed the tunnel's existence, had lied. Not about everything. The tunnel really existed, but she had omitted something crucial. She knew who else had used it. And it wasn't an isolated case in the 60s. It was a practice that had been going on for decades. When investigators confronted her with this possibility, Sister Francine, now 90 years old and in precarious health, broke down and confessed. There had been a network. A silent network of complicity. Not all the nuns were aware of it, but some were, the oldest ones, those who had been in the convent for 50 years or more. They knew about the tunnel. They knew that certain church benefactors used it for private visits. And they had remained silent because they had been told it was necessary, that those men were important, that questioning their presence would damage the church itself. It was a system of mutual protection. The church protected its powerful members, and in return those nuns who knew received privileges, donations for the convent, better food, recognition. Sister Francine cried as she told all this. I didn't know, she said through sobs. I didn't know what those men were really doing. I thought they just came to pray, to seek peace. No one ever told us they were doing harm. But was this ignorance true, or was it more convenient not to see, not to ask questions, to accept what you were told and enjoy the benefits that came from it? The investigators found the names. 5 men in total, over 40 years, had had access to that tunnel. 3 were dead. The other 2 were still alive. One was a retired bishop in his 90s, in a nursing home. The other was a Monsignor still active in the Roman Curia. Both were interrogated. The retired bishop had advanced dementia and couldn't even remember his own name, let alone events from decades ago. There was no way to prosecute him, but the Monsignor was lucid. He denied everything initially, but when shown the evidence, documents proving his visits to the convent on specific dates, financial records of his donations, he too broke down. He admitted to using the tunnel, but swore he had never harmed anyone. He said he had gone there only to pray, to find a place of peace away from the pressures of the Curia. The investigators didn't completely believe him. But without victims coming forward specifically against him, it was difficult to build a solid case. He was nonetheless removed from all positions and put into early retirement, a more lenient fate than what he deserved, according to many. But the real question remained. How many other victims had there been? How many women had suffered in silence, perhaps in the 50s, 60s, 70s? Women who were now elderly or dead, women who would never have justice. This revelation sparked an even bigger media wave than the first. It was no longer the case of one corrupt bishop. It was proof of a system, of a structure that for decades had permitted, facilitated, and covered up criminal behavior. Protests outside churches increased, victim groups organized, and the pressure on the church became unbearable. The Vatican was forced to do something unprecedented. It opened a global internal investigation, not just in America, but in all cloistered convents in the world. They wanted to know if there were other tunnels, other places where the system had failed, other silenced victims. The results were devastating. In 32 convents, spread across 15 countries, similar irregularities were found. Not always physical tunnels, but always some way in which the nuns' isolation had been violated, and always by men of power within the church. St. Clare's Convent had been only the tip of the iceberg. Agnes and Bernadette became central figures in this movement. They hadn't sought that visibility, but they accepted it because they knew it was important. They spoke at conferences, were interviewed, wrote articles, and above all, created an organization to support other victims who were finally finding the courage to speak. The organization was called Voices from Silence, and within a few years it reached thousands of members, women of all ages, from all countries, united by similar experiences of betrayal, of violation, of forced silence, but also of survival, of resilience, of hope. I became a volunteer for the organization. I wasn't a direct victim, but I had been a witness, and I felt the responsibility to use my voice to amplify theirs. We organized meetings, support groups, legal assistance, and slowly we saw change. Not fast enough, never enough. But it was a beginning. Matthew, Agnes's son, was growing up in this context. He was a cheerful child, full of energy. Unaware of the circumstances of his birth, Agnes had decided she would tell him when he was old enough to understand, but not with shame. She would tell him the truth. That he was born from a terrible situation, but that he was loved, deeply loved, and that he wasn't defined by that story, but by who he chose to be. Bernadette, on the other hand, had no children. The baby girl she had given up for adoption had grown up happy in another family. Bernadette had chosen not to seek contact out of respect for the girl's new life, but every year on her birthday she lit a candle and prayed, not to God because her faith had been destroyed, but to the universe, to life, to whatever force could protect that girl and give her the happiness she deserved. The years passed. The case of St. Clare's Convent became part of history, studied in universities, analyzed by psychologists, used as an example of how institutions can fail when power is not controlled. But for those who had lived it, it wasn't history. It was living memory. Scars that remained sensitive even after a long time. In 2010, 16 years after the initial discovery, a commemorative ceremony was organized at St. Clare's Convent. A plaque was installed in the courtyard. It didn't mention specific names, but simply said, "In memory of all the women who suffered in silence within these walls, may their voices never again be ignored." Agnes, Bernadette, and I were present, as were many other former nuns, and also some of the nuns who had known but remained silent. Old, fragile, carrying the weight of their silent complicity. There were no hugs between victims and accomplices. There was no easy forgiveness. But there was recognition that all, in different ways, had been trapped in a system bigger than themselves. During the ceremony, Agnes took the floor. Matthew, now 16, was beside her. Tall, with the same hazel eyes as his mother, he was studying to become a lawyer, specializing in human rights. He had chosen that path after learning the truth about his birth, not for revenge, but to ensure that other people found justice faster than his mother had. "This place," said Agnes, looking at the convent walls, "for a long time was synonymous with pain for me. But today I choose to see it differently. This is the place where the truth finally emerged, where silence was broken, and where a change began that continues today." Her words resonated in the silent courtyard, and I saw tears fall on many faces. Tears of pain, but also of catharsis, of liberation. Bernadette spoke after her. "They taught us that faith requires blind obedience," she said. But they were wrong. True faith requires questions. It requires courage. It requires the strength to say no when something is wrong, no matter who is asking you. Those were powerful words, and I knew they would resonate far beyond that courtyard. After the ceremony, we walked in the garden. The same garden where Sister Agnes spent hours among the roses. The plants were still there, older, bigger. Some had died and been replaced, but the garden lived. "It's strange," said Agnes, touching a rose petal, "how life continues, how plants grow, bloom, die, and are reborn. Everything continues, with or without us." It was a melancholic reflection, but also full of hope. Because if life continues, then there's always possibility for healing, for rebirth. Matthew joined us. "Mom," he said, "thank you for bringing me here. I know it wasn't easy." Agnes hugged him. You needed to see this place. You needed to understand where we come from, not to be trapped by it, but to know that we survived and that you are the symbol of that survival. It was a moment of profound beauty in a place that had seen so much darkness. As we returned toward the exit, I noticed that the tunnel had been completely sealed, not just walled up, but cemented over. And above it, a small chapel had been built, an open chapel without doors where anyone could enter freely, a symbol. Where once there was secrecy and darkness, now there was openness and light. Let's move to the final balance of this story, because it's important to understand the real impact it had. Father Dominic and the system he represented caused incalculable damage, but from their fall was born a movement that led to concrete changes. Let's see what really changed. The Catholic Church, after the St. Clare's Convent scandal and subsequent revelations, was forced to implement new policies. These weren't voluntary changes. They were the result of public pressure, lawsuits, and threats of completely losing the faithful's trust. First, all cloistered convents in the world had to install direct communication systems with dioceses that bypassed internal structures. Every nun could at any time contact an external authority if she felt she was in danger or wanted to report inappropriate behavior. These communications were confidential and protected. Second, visits by any member of the clergy to convents had to be documented, scheduled, and supervised. No more solitary visits, no more unmonitored access. Third, a compensation fund was created for victims. It wasn't enough. No amount of money could compensate for the trauma suffered, but at least it publicly acknowledged that there had been an injustice and that the Church had a responsibility. Fourth, hundreds of prelates who had been implicated in similar behavior or who had covered up such behavior were removed from their positions. Not all were prosecuted civilly, but all lost their power within the ecclesiastical structure. Fifth, and perhaps most important, a mandatory education program was instituted for all clergy. Education on appropriate boundaries, on consent, on recognizing and preventing predatory behavior, and above all, education on the fact that no position, no matter how high, puts a person above moral or civil law. These changes didn't solve everything. There are still problems, there are still cases that emerge, but the level of awareness has increased dramatically, and victims now know they have a voice, that they will be believed, that they are not alone. Agnes dedicated her life to this movement. She became an important public figure, invited to speak not only in America but around the world. Her message was always the same: silence protects oppressors, never victims. You must speak. You must make yourself heard, and we will be here to listen to you. Bernadette took a different but equally important path. She opened a therapy center specialized for victims of religious trauma. Many don't realize how specific this type of trauma is. It's not just the physical or psychological trauma of the act itself. It's also the betrayal of faith, the destruction of trust in something that was supposed to be sacred and protective. Rebuilding after this requires a particular type of care. And Bernadette, having lived that experience, knew exactly what was needed. Her center helped hundreds of people, not just women, men too. Also children who had grown up in religious environments where they had suffered various types of violations. The center offered free or very low-cost therapy. It was funded by donations and ironically also by part of the Church's compensation fund. I continued my work as a teacher, but always integrated into my teaching lessons on the importance of speaking up when something is wrong. I taught children that no adult, no matter how important, had the right to make them feel uncomfortable or ask them to keep secrets that made them feel bad. Had I taught them that if something seemed wrong, it probably was. They had to trust their instinct. Some parents complained. They said I was making children distrustful, rebellious, but most understood. They understood I was giving their children protection tools. Tools that perhaps if the nuns at St. Clare's Convent had had them, could have saved them. In 2020, 26 years after the events, a documentary about the case was filmed. Agnes, Bernadette, and I were interviewed, as were investigators, lawyers, psychologists, and church historians. The documentary didn't spare details. It was hard, raw, honest. When it was broadcast, it generated another wave of discussion. Some criticized the documentary for being too harsh on the church. Others praised it for finally telling the truth without filters. But the most important thing was that after the broadcast, another 34 women came forward with similar stories. Stories they had kept hidden for decades. The documentary had given them the courage to speak, and every single story was taken seriously, investigated, and where possible, brought to justice. Matthew, Agnes's son, completed his studies and indeed became a lawyer. His first major case was representing a group of victims in a similar case in California. He won, and that victory opened the way for many others. It was extraordinary to see how from something so terrible, a new generation of fighters had been born. People who would not allow the past to repeat itself. Bernadette's baby girl, now an adult woman, learned of her biological story when she was 25 years old. Her adoptive parents, wonderful people, explained everything to her with love and sensitivity. They gave her the choice to seek or not seek her biological mother. She thought about it for a year and then decided to meet Bernadette. The meeting took place in a park in Washington, D.C. Bernadette was terrified. What would she say? How would that young woman react knowing the circumstances of her birth? But when they saw each other, the young woman simply hugged Bernadette. "Thank you," she whispered, "for giving me life. And thank you for having the strength to give me a family who could love me the right way." Bernadette cried. She cried like she had never cried before. They were tears of relief, of gratitude, of a wound finally beginning to heal. They didn't develop a traditional mother-daughter relationship, but they became friends. They saw each other a few times a year, emailed regularly, and Bernadette could see that that baby, whose birth had been surrounded by so much pain, had become a happy, complete, loved woman. It was proof that even from the darkest circumstances, light can emerge. In 2023, almost 30 years after the events, I returned one last time to St. Clare's Convent. Agnes and Bernadette came with me. We all three had grey hair now. Time had passed, but we had survived. We had grown. We were stronger. The convent still housed some nuns, but many fewer than before. It had also become a spiritual retreat center, open to everyone. Men and women could come for days of silence, meditation, reflection, but with total transparency and security. The new Mother Superior, Sister Clare, was a 55-year-old woman with a completely modern approach. She welcomed us warmly. "This place," she said, "carries the weight of its history, but we're trying to transform it into something positive, a place of healing rather than wounds." It was a noble goal, and it seemed they were succeeding. We walked once again in the garden. The roses were in bloom. Agnes picked one and held it in her hands. "I remember when I planted this bush," she said. "I was 23 years old. I was so naive, so full of hopes and dreams." "And now?" asked Bernadette. Agnes smiled, a sad but genuine smile. "Now I'm full of scars, but also of wisdom and of gratitude for still being here, for still being able to feel the beauty of a rose." We sat on a bench, the three of us together, looking at the walls that had seen so much, and for the first time in 30 years, I felt a true peace in that place. "Do you think we've done enough?" I asked. "Do you think the world has really changed?" Bernadette thought about it. "Not enough, not yet, but we've done something. We've broken the silence, and every person who speaks now does so a little more easily thanks to us. It's a beginning." Agnes nodded. Good doesn't always win immediately, but in the end, the truth emerges. Always. And when it emerges, evil can no longer hide. She was right. The evil that Father Dominic and the others had perpetrated had been exposed, judged, condemned. There was no longer any place to hide, and the victims, all those women who had suffered, finally had a voice. Finally, they were believed. Finally, they could begin to heal. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange and pink. It was beautiful. That place, despite everything, still had beauty. As we left the convent for the last time, Agnes turned back. "Goodbye," she whispered, not to the place itself, but to the ghosts that inhabited it, to the painful memories, to the frightened girl she had been. "Goodbye," Bernadette and I repeated, and we walked away toward the future, toward the light. This is the story of two nuns who became pregnant in a closed convent, of a bishop who used his position to do harm, of a system that protected the oppressor rather than the victims. But it's also the story of courage, of survival, of how the truth, however painful, is always better than the lie. It's the story of how silence, when finally broken, loses all its power. And in the end, it's the story of how good, slowly but inexorably, wins over evil. Because Father Dominic died in prison, dishonored and forgotten. But Agnes lives, Bernadette lives, Matthew lives. And millions of people who have heard this story now know they can speak, that they will be listened to, that they are not alone. This is the true power of truth. It doesn't erase the pain, it doesn't reverse time, but it creates a future where that pain is less likely to repeat itself. And this, in the end, is all we can hope for. Learn from the past, protect the present, and build a better future. The story of St. Clare's Convent isn't just history, it's a warning, a reminder, and a hope that light will always prevail, even in the deepest darkness.